Good morning, everyone. So glad it's cold green, and we are here to start our meeting on time. All right, welcome to the second FY 2026 operating budget work session. I'm going to first allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. I'll start from my left-hand side.
Good morning, Carla Silvestre, School Board Member at Large.
Good morning, buenos dias. Grace Rivera Oven, representing District 1.
Good morning, Rita Montoya, Board Member at Large.
And I'm Julie Yang, President of the Board, District 3. I want you all know that Ms. Wolf is ill, but she's paying close attention to our budget progress. And Ms. Stewart is representing us at a meeting right now, but she will join us shortly. And so, yeah, and we have other board members joining us shortly. All right, thank you so much. Now, before we begin today's important budget conversation, I want to again reiterate the board's commitment to ensuring that our school remains a place of opportunity, growth, and support for all. Now, creating a budget is more than just crunching numbers. It's about investing in the future and strengthening our programs. This process reflects our values, the hard work and dedication of the board, the administration, and all the staff in our school system. Our topic today is discretionary expenditure. Staff should point out pertinent issues that may concern the board. As always, board members are free to ask questions at any point. Due to the large quantity of information, I would like board members to focus on questions that will help you make decisions for this budget. We will have another work session, our final one, on Thursday, January 30th at 10 a.m., and we will hold a second public hearing on January 27th at 6 p.m. here. We also, to align our effort to have more direct community engagement, we have 2 additional community information sessions on budget. The first one will be held on the 28th, 6:30 at Payne Branch, and the second one will be virtually on Thursday, January 30th, also at 6:30. All right, and all information are online on our webpage. To start, I see that Ms. Stewart has joined us. You want to say hello?
Good morning. Glad to be here. Thank you.
And Ms. Zimmerman.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Yes, all right. Dr. Taylor, can you start us off?
Thank you so much, Madam President, members of the board, and what a great topic today to talk about investments. In particular, the things that we know that can help move the district forward in a meaningful way. We do have some additional updates in today's presentation and some follow-ups for some of the other items that we discussed in previous meetings. So this should be a great conversation. To reiterate kind of where we are in the budget process and to talk about the board's priorities and the direction that you set. We are very proud of the goals and objectives that you laid before us and that we have reflected those goals and objectives in our budget presentation and the proposal that you have for consideration. Our budget is about focusing our resources on supporting our schools, getting back to the fundamentals that will make our school system great, tightening up things in reflection of fiscal stewardship, and presenting that information in a transparent way. So we're very eager to answer questions that the board may have and that the community has offered as well. This work session, we get to give you a big update on state revenue. In hindsight, we probably should have timed this revenue update for after the budgets, the governor's budget proposal. We'll do that again next year a little bit differently in terms of timing because we do have some new information that does change our landscape a little bit. But the main focus of today is about our discretionary expenditures. It's a short list, but it's a really meaningful list, which does provide us the opportunity to follow up on some of the items that you brought forward in terms of questions, some data requests, and we get to illuminate some of those things today. So we're very excited. We will be talking at our next work session, our final work session, for the board on changes to the base budget, what our central office reorganization or restructuring would look like, and then closing up on follow-up items and board member questions that will help you discern the path forward in what will go into the final budget proposal for consideration on February 4th. So with that, we're going to talk about revenue, and I'm going to turn things over to our fabulous Chief Financial Officer, Yvonne Alfonso-Windsor.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Young, President of the Board, and members of the Board. Thank you. So when the superintendent recommends his budget in December, at that point, we have not received the state aid yet. The governor has not put out his budget, so we always have to revise the revenue based on his recommendations. And as of right now, we know that he has recommended a budget that still has to go through the General Assembly. So let's go really quickly over the revenue that was presented when the superintendents recommended the budget back in December. Federal is about $107 million, a state $983 million. The county contribution, $2.4 million. Other source, $2.4 billion, sorry. Other sources, $22 million, and then the enterprise funds and our special revenue funds, $92 million. So the state has changed a bit. That number actually represented an increase of $10 million from the prior year based on analysis. And it is difficult to project the state aid because it is in comparison to all the other LEAs, and it's based on enrollment, and it's based on wealth factor as well. And those numbers don't come out until December. Since the governor has released his budget, there is an increase for MCPS, a recommended increase. There's a recommended increase of over $53 million more than what was in the FY26 recommended by the superintendent. But unfortunately, and things are changing day to day, I just found out new information today, although there is an increase of $53 million, there's other recommendations that he's making that could result really for us that we're going to just see maybe $6 million increase, or maybe it's going to be flat, the increase, because we're going to have to absorb expenditures that we were not planning for. So for example, the governor's budget and the foundation's formula, some of the state aid has included for the last few years a local blueprint requirement for the planning time. And based on calculations, we have not been released to us yet, but this is an assumption. That $53 million, if his recommendation goes through, it could be a decrease for us of about 15 to 16 million. So we would have to continue what we're doing in planning time, which means that we would use a lot of that additional funding towards that additional planning time at this time. And there's other blueprint factors that we're going to go through that will impact that information as well. So as we see here, community schools, the governor is recommending an increase of 24 community schools for MCPS additional for next year, which would bring us up to 77 schools. Along with that comes additional state aid of $10.7 million must be used for community schools, right? Cannot be used for anything else. Along with that, there's a local match. So they're giving us $10.7 million, but the local government has to put out a local match for that. And right now, that looks like it's $8.6 million. So that could eat those decrease those $6 million, and we might even have to produce a little bit more. It depends on what our allocations are to community schools. So that's a portion of that. I just talked about the blueprint planning time, that if it is reduced, it's going to be about $14 to $15 million, in terms of the state aid reduction. The next aspect, and this is a big impact to not only us, but all the LEAs, the governor is recommending that there's a decrease on their share of the non-public placements. So as you know, special education, our budget is about $53 million to place students in, public placement, if it is recommended or is there need for students to receive those services in those areas. Right now, the state reimburses us for 70% of the cost. They're recommending a decrease of 60% for FY26. And I just found out this morning through conversations that for FY27, their recommendation will be to make that only 50%. They would only reimburse us for 50%, which means that all of these are going to have repercussions in the following years. All these cuts are going to have substantial repercussions in the years to come. So we are going to have to bear a larger share of that. Again, that would have to, take part of that additional increase that we're seeing on state aid. So right now in our budget for revenue for reimbursements, you see that it's about a $19.1 million that we get from the state. That could be reduced for next year by $2.5 to $4 million. The state haven't given us those numbers yet, so we're calculating. Those are based on calculations that we're currently making. Then the pension shift is another big impact to our budget. And this is going to have repercussions for many years to come because as our salaries increases, the cost of pension increases. And we have seen it actually over the last 3 years where we've had to add between $6 and $9 million to the budget just to keep with the rising cost of the pension as a result of the salary increases. Because remember, what they shift to us also as salary increase across the state, that has an impact on the rate of the pension contribution across Maryland. So right now, the governor is recommending that we're going to shift $93 million of the state retirement to the local LEAs. That's for all the school systems in Maryland. When this first happened back in 2013, it was a cost to us of about $81.8 million that is this year. That's what we pay in this year. That's our local share. For next year with this shift, it would be an additional $20 million. So again, that will have an impact on our state aid, and it's not something that is going to be a one-year impact. That amount is going to increase year to year if that shift happens. So in summary, as we have talked about it, the new state aid, we are getting $53 million, but if Blueprint, the planning time is cut, that's a reduction of $15 million. If, we have to absorb the non-public education, that could be another $4 million. We know that we're going to have to do a local share for our community schools based on the new additional community schools. And the pension, that's going to be a huge impact to us. So although we're seeing an increase in the revenue, we are going to have to show an increase on the expenditures as well on our side.
Sorry, and just so I'm understanding clearly, at this time, we anticipate our expenditures would exceed this amount of money that we're seeing.
That's correct.
Actually, let me do the quick math for you.
Yes,
So
please.
you've got proposed in the governor's budget for Montgomery County Public Schools to receive an additional $53.7 million. But they're tying that money to expectations changes as well. Within that $53.7 million increase, there is also a hit to us in terms of the Blueprint planning time expectations of around $15 million, so minus $15 million, minus $8.6 million in our local contribution required for the expansion of community schools, minus an additional $4 million for the change in the reimbursement split, which will have some really significant long-term impacts to private placements. So that's an extra $4 million. And then another $20 million hit to our additional pension liability contribution. So of the $53.7 million, we are still better off today than we were yesterday, but the changes only leave us with an additional $6 million in state revenue. So what that looks like on our books today, if we were to revise the next version of Table 1A and present this to the public, is that our local request goes down because our state revenue goes up by $6.1 million.
Dr. Taylor, one number I want to double check for the collaborative planning time. I was assuming the cost to us will be more than $15 million because based on per pupil funding, but you mentioned 15.
Yeah, that's a cost estimate right now, and that's representative in people and personnel. Do you want to illuminate a little bit of that?
Yes, and remember that $50 million only represents what the state gives us for collaborative planning, not what we spend, towards that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, this is a good stopping place to talk about
can I
revenue,
just
if
really
Madam
quickly-
President. Yeah.
But early on, Yvonne, you said that this is as of right now, that there is a possibility that that 53 million could become a 6 million increase or flat.
Yes.
So the 53 million at this point is just kind of maybe hearsay that we might get it, or is it for sure?
So right now, the state aid is at an additional 53 million.
Correct.
But with the additional expenditures that we're going to have to make as a result of the shifting from the state funding to the local
That's
funding.
your 6 million that you were
It's
talking.
gonna
Okay, I just
reduce
wanted
that.
to-
Yeah.
Okay.
And the flat could mean, because if the community schools, the local share could actually absorb a lot of those 6 million. So that why it could become flat.
Yeah.
And this is just the governor's proposed budget at this time, right? It still needs to go
Correct.
through the House and the Senate and back. So nothing is guaranteed until things get signed, right?
That is the fun of the budget process, is that we are all very much on shifting revenue sands at the moment. And we adjust as new information becomes available. We watch the General Assembly quite closely for just that reason, that we do expect there to be adjustments and changes. We just hope that those adjustments and changes don't adversely position us. This is a really interesting situation for us to be in, because even though it's reflective of additional revenue, it also carries with it the expectation of additional expenditure. So there are things that are tied to the additional revenue. It's not like there's this big windfall that MCPS gets as a consequence of the
I
governor's
think
budget.
for us, board members and community members, I think one key thing to understand is things like reimbursement rate for private school placement, pension contribution, shifting the responsibility. These, and also community school, this will build into future budgets. And in the future, that means a bigger base budget that the school system has to be prepared for. And there's no guarantee future funding will reflect these shifting burden to the from the state level will represent these shifting costs to the base budget.
It's actually quite troubling because not only will this have a multi-year downwind effect, this is one of those things that it is hard for a lot of our public to explain and understand. Why on earth does your budget keep getting bigger every year when
Right.
really more and more of the state's share of responsibility historically shifts back to the local government? They have to cover the cost. And I'll give you some concrete examples. When we have students with disabilities with severe needs that require a placement that is outside of the K through 12 public school system, we do utilize the support of private placement. We rely heavily on our partners, and there is a split in terms of how we finance that, and a large portion comes from the state. When that split changes, there's no change in service. The service is still the same, but the costs are elevated for the locality, and it is hard for our constituents to get their heads wrapped around it. When somebody retires from our school system and they are used to drawing from the more heavily on the state retirement in terms of their retirement revenue, we will have retirees in the future. And when that balance shifts to more and more of that coming from the locality, there's no change in service, just more and more of those dollars are coming from the locality to offset that expense. And it's hard for folks to get their heads wrapped around that.
Ms. Stewart?
I have a question about that has to do with what's required, and then we're taking the costs. So the collaborative time that he's shifting some of that money away, is the requirement also being shifted? And I know this is we want to do this. I'm not discounting it. I'm just trying to understand unfunded mandates. Is collaborative time an unfunded mandate?
Yes, there's some lack of clarity with some of the blueprint components. So this is part of the shifting sands that we're sitting on to see what the what the expectations really flesh out to be. Our understanding is that with some of the funding moving from one fiscal year to another fiscal year, that also the expectations are also aligned with that, but that's not set in stone, and there isn't clarity on that. So we're still seeking that clarity.
Okay, and just one more, it's just not a question, it's a point, that the state keeps shifting the local share, yet they restrict the way our local government can produce revenue. So
Precisely.
there's an imbalance there. And so that's something I think we need to talk to our local legislators about, that if you're going to keep shifting costs, then you also need to shift the ability to raise revenue.
Dr. Taylor, I was in the community, and one community member brought up an interesting point. He asked, do we keep a running record of unfunded mandate? Or today, as we're talking, do we keep a running record of shifting financial responsibility from state to local? I think there's some value of doing that. Many of the things we want to do, not that we don't want to do, right? Either be unfunded mandate or provide services for our students and families. But for us to understand the landscape of our financial responsibility, and also for us to work with different level of government, I think it will be beneficial to have those data so that we can have more conversation geared towards how to do this problem solving together.
I think that's something that all Montgomery County citizens can universally agree to, that the closer the decisions are to Montgomery County, the better the decisions tend to be. And though we don't keep a running list, we're grateful for that recommendation, and we think that that's a great idea. It may take some time to put that together because we have so many. Right. We certainly will talk about a couple of them today. We have already talked about a couple of them, one of which is also covered. And some of these ideas are great, but may not fit necessarily into the list of the must-do priorities that our community may have or that the board may have. And it's important to recognize that, you know, the issues in Dorchester County and Calvert County are not the same issues as Montgomery County, and decisions that get made in Annapolis that are presumably for the best interest of the state may not necessarily be in the best interest of Montgomery County, and we need to have a mechanism to communicate that. So we'd love to have that conversation. That's a great idea. So thank whoever gave you that suggestion. That's a great one, and I think our entire community would love to see what that looks like. Are we ready to proceed?
Yeah,
now?
let's continue.
Yeah, do you want us to hold our questions, or is there a discussion?
Is it related to this?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Just a comment on the blueprint. If you have any insight, I'm trying to wrap my head around planning time. Our math coaches, our academic folks are telling us we need more planning time, collaborative time, so that the teachers can have time to unpack the curriculum, collaborate, and that will yield better academic outcomes for our students. We know we need that. We heard our staff telling us that. While I love community schools, there is no evidence of academic achievement, and that they're not even collecting data right now on the impact of community schools on academic achievement, which is the mission of Montgomery County Public Schools. So do you have any insight as to why it's community schools, which we all love, is being prioritized ahead of collaborative planning time, which will have impact on our academic achievement?
We do not have insight as to what the administration's priorities are and why they chose that over the other. Although looking at the balance sheet in terms of the overall long-term and short-term costs, the short-term costs seem comparable, but the long-term costs are more significant with planning time because of the need for changes to staffing. There's a lot of improvement to make in that space to make that a reality. But we don't have any concrete insights as to why the administration chose that as a part of their budget focus versus planning time.
Yeah, I just encourage us to keep up our advocacy so that they're hearing from us in terms of, again, prioritizing the Blueprint initiative so that we do them in a way that makes sense.
And I do want to add, we have been hearing at meetings that this will be the last year right now that they're going to recommend an increase to community schools, that after this year is going to be frozen and they're not going to add any more until they're able to determine, what the impact is of community schools to academic achievement and moving forward. We actually thought that this would be the year that they would freeze it, but they didn't. So that was a surprise to us.
Thank you.
Let's proceed.
All right. Now we get to talk about the fun stuff, our discretionary expenditures. And just as a quick reminder, the difference between a non-discretionary expenditure and a discretionary expenditure. If something is a non-discretionary expenditure, it made our list because there is either a law, a regulation, a policy, or a contract that sets a direction or compels us to a financial commitment. Discretionary expenditures are different. These are a choice. These are an option that we have in terms of how we go about this work, the level of commitment that we make to a specific product or a specific approach or a specific strategy. And we think that there are several things that we would like the board to consider and to evaluate as part of its budget. Because we believe these are things that can enhance the school environment and improve our standing as a school system. And so we want to tackle them one at a time. The first one is one that I'm very proud of. This is a strategy that I've been a part of in other districts and am happy to bring to Montgomery County, which is a differentiated school site allocation and an equity add-on for our materials and supplies budget at each of our schools. I would make a strong argument that this is some of the best money in the budget spent. This actually appears in two places in your budget. The first place that it appears actually as a non-discretionary expenditure, as an inflationary adjustment to what we already spend on materials and supplies. That's a very small amount of money that is just accounting for inflation from one year to the next. The reason that we included this as an inflationary expense in the non-discretionary component is because this is a number that hasn't moved in the last 2 decades, and that keeping up with inflation does have a difference and does make a difference to what our principals are experiencing. The part that is discretionary is how we would go about augmenting the principal's bank account from central office in terms of how we allocate funds for materials and supplies and additional support, and what those principals might use those funds for to enhance the learning environment in a meaningful way. And so that's what we want to talk about. We know that our schools are different. We know that our schools need different things, and so we have a few comparisons that we wanted to showcase for you. We think that all of our schools could use an enhancement to their materials and supplies line, and we want to account for some of the factors that impact the school environment and need additional support, like the number of farm students that we have, the number of EML students that we have, and the number of students with disabilities, and providing additional funds based on those populations and the changes that those populations have in each school setting. So what on earth might they use these funds for? This is a great way that principals can perhaps purchase translated text, provide high dosage tutoring, provide additional materials and supplies to augment students who need school supplies. There's a whole host of things that we know that will make a significant difference for some of our students. And right now, there isn't a mechanism to offset some of those additional expenses. And we know that our principals could really put this money to use in a meaningful way. This strategy we see as a starting point and not something that we would do just once, but rather that we would use this approach as a year one implementation and make additions over the next several years to enhance accounts to offset some of the difference over the last 2 decades where we really haven't improved this line at all. The next strategy and next approach has to do with menstrual hygiene products in our schools. Well, this one is an interesting one for sure. Namely because there is a state law that requires us to have menstrual products in all of our restrooms. However, this is an unfunded mandate. And the reason that it's discretionary, and you could make a strong and compelling case that it could be non-discretionary, but the reason that it's discretionary is in being an unfunded mandate, there's no mechanism to say how much you should be committing to this line. We would like to create a starting point investment in this space as well. Right now, principals use their materials and supply line to offset expenses for providing menstrual supplies in our restrooms. And we are advocating for at least a starting point where we could make an investment into our school materials and supply lines, specifically earmarked to offset the expenses that schools are experiencing in this space. So this was previously started with some grant funds and kicked off in that space, but as we all know, grant funds are not reoccurring and not part of a sustainable ongoing budget. So we would like to make this a part of the sustainable ongoing budget and build on this over time. Another significant enhancement has to do with system-wide safety. We believe that we do need to enhance our security assistant workforce. We think that by adding additional security assistants in some targeted areas and growing this over time, that we can improve the safety and security across the district. We would like to expand into the elementary school space in a meaningful way, expand some of our middle school and even our high school footprint in some spaces, and differentiate our staffing approach targeted to the severity of some serious incidents, and also to have great geographic spread of some of our support so that our schools can have access to security assistance very quickly when they need them. We have a whole host of things in a very geographically diverse community where many of our school footprints are in urban areas, some are in rural areas. We have visitors that come onto campus, some invited, some not invited, and making sure that our schools are safe places for children to learn, for adults to work, and for visitors to visit is really important to us, and we think that this is a great starting place for us to continue to make enhancements in that space. There was a board resolution last year to take a look at renaming schools, in particular schools that were named after individuals who previously owned other humans. And as a result of that, there were a process initiated for school communities to investigate and to look at the renaming of their school. Colonel Zadok Magruder High School was one of the schools that completed the process in alignment with the board's policy. And we have earmarked some funds in the 25 budget as well as in the 26 budget, and this is reflective of that. We have some strategies and some suggestions on how you might go about this, but it's important to know that even if you do change a school name, that there's a cost associated with it, and really we want to be able to communicate that to the community, that when you do change a school name, that there are things like signage, as well as everything from athletic uniforms and a whole host of printed materials that also needs to be updated, and that does have a cost. And so we need to be sensitive to that, as well as making sure that we're mirroring our community's values. One big component that we are looking at this year in conjunction with your boundary study is to make sure that we do this very well. And that we do this in a very deliberate and intentional way of making sure that we have program access for all of our young people to have great academic opportunities. We are, in an abundance of caution, earmarking some money to make sure that we do that process correctly. We think that this is something that we can do in-house, but in the event that we need to solicit additional help, we want to make sure that we have money set aside to do so. This is out of an abundance of caution, not a specific vendor or anything that we're looking at this time. But we do want to acknowledge that a study of this depth and to do it well may also incur a cost, and we don't want to have to pull from some other budget line to fund something later on. The next item, in working with our career and technical education foundations and spending some time fleshing out some of our educational opportunities for some of our secondary students, we've looked hard at our programming. We see an enhancement opportunity specifically in the hospitality and tourism space where we could be looking at some of our programs and really expanding that space in a really meaningful way because it ties so directly to our regional economy. And we feel like an investment in hospitality and tourism with an instructional specialist is something that the board needs to consider. Similarly, another expansion opportunity is to take a look at our existing CREA program. One of the things that we would like to do is to stabilize this program and also expand it and offer this opportunity to more students. We have a program that's in existence right now. We feel like this really does need to be shored up and can become a lot more robust with more comprehensive supports. We do have a plan for that, and I'll show you what that looks like, is to make this program a little bit more concrete. We have kind of pulled budget items from different budgets to make this program work in the past. We'd like to formalize this and give full-time equivalents to this space to make it a lot more robust and to also welcome other students who are exiting the high school program, running out of time to finish on time, and making sure that as students are released into our community, that they have great industry certifications and a very bright future ahead of them. We feel like that we can do that a little bit better with what we would like to call CREA Plus, a little CREA with a little sprinkle on top, a little bit extra CREA. Similarly, we do see great utility in virtual learning and online learning. Our footprint this year, as everybody knows, the board had to make some very difficult budget decisions last year and may have to make difficult budget decisions again this year. But there is some utility in making sure that we are serving our students who can't be served in the regular education setting well, but then also leveraging through virtual learning the opportunity for students to access really exciting coursework in other places in a more efficient way. We have a course catalog that is so envied throughout the country because of the exciting and really terrific opportunities that our students and faculty have come up with. But unfortunately, many of those courses are limited to the schools in which that passion project came from in the first place. We would like to make those opportunities available to more students from across the county. And one of the ways that we can do that is through a distance learning option. So that's an area that we would like to expand to moving forward. And we have a game plan for what that might look like moving ahead and how we might provide a little bit more of a robust blending and online learning footprint. Getting close to closing this out, we also see great utility in being better communicators of student performance and see the need to look at how our students are performing and make sure that our parents and families understand how our students are performing in a more deliberate way. There's nothing more frustrating for a parent than not being able to help your student at home because either the reports that you're getting from the school are confusing or the work is confusing. We would like to take some of the guesswork out of some of the reporting that we send home to families. We feel like there is an opportunity for us to communicate better, And there is also an opportunity for us to assess how our students are doing from a social and emotional standpoint. And these are really spaces that we should expand in as a school district. Last piece in the budget has to do with how we're led. I think that when we are operating at our best and when we are functioning at our best as a school system, we are all speaking the same language and we are working together and we use the same mechanisms in which we hold ourselves accountable and we measure our performance. It is time for MCPS to adopt a project management approach, to communicate that project management approach, to train its leadership workforce, and to begin a multi-year process of training its entire leadership corps on how to manage projects better so that we can hold ourselves better accountable and measure our progress more succinctly. It is a big investment for us to invest in our leaders, but a worthy one when we know that we can conduct ourselves a little bit more efficiently than how we have in the past. So with that, I'm going to pause and before we jump into follow-up information. And Madam President, now would be a great time to answer questions the board may have on individual items that are discretionary expenditures.
Board members, if you have questions, turn on your light, and then we'll go one question, one comment, and then we'll do a second round. Okay, I'm going to start from Ms. Zimmerman.
Great, thank you. So I am curious about our blended learning program a little bit. I'm wondering, when I was going through the current FY25 budget, I had a hard time finding what we're already spending on that, if anything. So that's my first. I'm wondering, what are we already spending? And then kind of what's the cost difference between a formal virtual school and the blended learning program? Just curious what the difference would be.
Well, I'll let Ms. Alfonso Windsor opine on this in a second, but I will say that where we found ourselves this summer was the need to still provide services to some students who couldn't access the regular education program. And so we leveraged grant funds from title programs to pull things together after the budget process. So this is one of those items that if we want to continue the level of service that we have, we really are at a decision point because we really do need to budget for the things that we want to continue because we cobbled this together from lots of different sources, not dissimilar to CREA. And for the first thing that we should do is establish a line, fund the line to our existing level of performance, and then any enhancements that we want to do to add on to that. And this does represent both shoring up and an enhancement.
Yes, thank you. So like Dr. Taylor mentioned, we did use Title IV grants when, we needed to provide support to those students. We're funding currently a coordinator for the program through the Title IV grants. I'm providing professional part-time support. That's how we are compensating the teachers, that are working after schools, to support this program. In addition, we are using from the K-12 budget reserve, we are spending about three teachers that are providing, that advanced math support to our elementary students, so they can access that grant support. And now all of that is reflected in this budget moving forward. When it comes to the, to the virtual academy that we had in the past few years, that budget, the enrollment for that program was very large and then started decreasing. We eliminated from the budget about $5 million in expenses last year, but that was not everything that we were spending in the Montgomery Virtual Academy because we were supporting that program with staffing from other areas as well, just to make it work. So we were taking resources from special education, resources from K-12, to support the Montgomery Virtual Academy. So the $5 million was just one line item specifically for it, but we were pulling resources from other areas to supplement that program.
So it sounds like this blended learning program that we're adding, it's already some of the things that were in there. We're confirming that this is where where that money is going, giving it its own line item, and spending significantly less than we would for a formal virtual academy.
Yes.
That's correct.
Right. Ms. Silvestri?
I just have I have my own questions, but just to clarify, is this to have funding to run the online program for the medically fragile students?
Yes, that's the target audience, but we also want to look at expansion into high school programming where we can do some distance learning courses and look at courses that, you know, are some of the passion courses that have been added to the course catalog and how we can make them available at more than just a handful of high schools.
Can you give me an example of a course that might qualify for this?
Off the top of my head, probably not, but every year the board adopts new courses as part of its program of study and its course catalog. And those, world languages is one for sure that we know we can leverage, but they are interest courses in discrete topics that are often offered only at 1 or 2 or 3 high schools. So being able to offer them more broadly really enhances our opportunities for kids.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think board members, I remember Hannah Looney advocating strongly for this, and it just makes sense. We have the technology, we have the interest, we have a big county. My question is about the equity funds. So I understand the differentiation based on need of school. Will principals have some guidance in terms of best practices so that they are investing these additional dollars in things that are proven to work?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll use a couple of examples and recycle one in particular. We know that high dosage tutoring can be very effective. We know that it can. That when there's a subject matter expert who is aligning the support to the curriculum and it's reinforcing what's happening in the classroom, you can get some pretty great results. Right now, there is no tutoring budget anywhere in MCPS because that was largely tied to ESSER funds that have since expired. So how do you augment support for students who are struggling? Well, right now we don't have a mechanism for that. So targeting resources to the population that you are trying to help the most becomes really important. It's very important that we continue the base level funding that we are already providing for materials and supplies. A good way to think about this with this equity add-on is how are you improving the circumstances for the target audiences that we're focusing on, and in this case, it's our students who receive free or reduced meals, our students with disabilities, and our EML students. Well, our guidance would be to principals, and we will provide this guidance, is that these are a list of really great expenditures that will support an enhanced learning environment for these populations, and that might help offset the expenses that you're experiencing in your schools. A lot of these schools have great and thriving PTAs that have a lot of money and can support the school very robustly, and many of these schools don't. And there's not really a mechanism to provide those extras that some of the schools without a financially strong PTA have, and this is one of those ways in which we can provide some of that support. We do not want our schools to spend this on pizza and T-shirts and those types of activities because they're not proven to be effective. But instructional materials, leveled instructional materials, translated instructional materials, those are great expenditures. Those things are wonderful additions and ways to incentivize support for our students that need it the most.
Okay. Yes, I can't emphasize enough. Guidance is needed on what is going to help academic achievement in your school. We can't try to fix the world. We have to focus on our mission. Thank you.
Ms. Montoya?
I have so many questions, so if I'm unable to ask them all, I will have to follow up later. To be honest, it's hard for me to decide which one I want to choose, but since we're talking about learning, and you mentioned high dosage tutoring, and we're talking about things to pay for with these equity add-ons. I have to ask, if we have children who can't read or do math, and we can't afford to provide high dosage tutoring, which we know works, why are we considering spending more money to allow some students to seek extra classes in other spaces when we have kids who can't read and do math?
Well, that certainly is a choice for the board. I will say that it does make sense for you to have a broad-based approach to how you invest your money in terms of tackling a lot of different issues. I think that this budget represents no concrete, complete solutions, but rather the starting place to making progress towards a lot of solutions. Whatever progress we make is going to have to be multi-year approaches to trying to address those problems. You could say as a board, you know, I'm just not interested in supporting this because I'd want to invest more in that. Well, that certainly is your prerogative.
And I know in the budget with the exhibit tied to that line, it says that we'll get more information. But one of the things I would like to know when we get that information is how much money are we talking about in terms of maintaining, and forgive me, I know the name has changed, but it used to be called like hospital school services or something like that, right? How much money is for that portion? And then how much money is for providing distance learning for, presumably these are high school students also, right? We're not talking about elementary school kids getting to go to other classes and other, right? We're talking about high school kids.
Yeah, so students who are in the process right now of identifying their high school course load for next year. So what we would be looking at is developing like the mechanism in which we would do this in planning for the following school year. So this is about planning for the 26-27 school year. We might find one or two courses that we're able to test out to see how this works, because keep in mind too, not all of our high schools operate on the same schedule. And so having a distance learning environment needs a lot of coordination and a lot of support. So a very little amount of money is committed to that initiative for this upcoming school year in favor of planning in advance for the following school year. But this is very much targeted to the home and hospital and shoring that up so that it's very robust.
Okay, and this would
Right now
be,
it's not.
again, also students for whom computer learning works for them, right? Because we know that not every student does well with computer learning, right?
This is targeted for students in the virtual learning environment.
Sorry, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
access to these other high school courses, right? So for some
yeah.
students, maybe I want to take hip hop and history and it's only at Blair, for example. But maybe I don't do well with computer learning, and so I'm not then, that the program is not going to be for me, right?
Yeah, and an asynchronous course is not going to be a great fit, but you may benefit from a distance learning class where it's happening at the same time as you have a place in your schedule and you're able to connect virtually, and you have a synchronous learning environment with an educator on the other side of the county. That's part of our hope. That's part of our component. So it's not like you're learning on a computer per se, but that you're utilizing technology to access the learning environment in another place.
Right, but again, for students for whom that works for them, right? Some students need to be in a classroom with a person,
Sure.
right? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Stewart?
Sure. I wanted to get back to a question Carla actually started, and that is this extra money going to principals to use based on need, which I think is a great idea. But will there be, I know they'll have direction from you, policy. I also would like to include some kind of collaborative approach to that. Discussions within the school, including the community, to have that feedback as we spend these funds. And also from the teachers as well. So I just want to make sure that these funds are going, where it can help the whole community the most and to actually affect change, because that's what we're looking for, right? we want positive change. And I think it's been shown that engagement helps that happen. And then as far as the, talking about using technology to access courses, and I think that, there's different needs at different levels. And right now, I have heard that some kids in elementary school are accessing enhancement, so like the accelerated math through online. And how is that working? And are you planning on continuing that for elementary school? Or is this something that we're looking at staffing for? I just want an idea of.
Our Chief Academic Officer, Peggy Pugh, is coming up to talk about accelerated math and how we do that.
Thank you.
And how it's reflected in the budget.
Yeah.
So the first part of that is that what we found when last year we were faced with MVA closing, one of the pieces that had been expanded there was virtual access to our accelerated math, which was extremely helpful to schools who didn't have a whole cohort of students, but who had some students who still needed access to that level of rigor. And so building into this plan, we would like to maintain that. It is to maintain what is currently in existence, which is middle school focused.
Middle school focused.
Correct.
So,
So upper elementary and middle school.
okay. Yeah, maybe that's a discussion for another day, but I just wanted to know how that was reflected in the budget. And I saw the contract. Actually, I'll wait for the next round. That's good for now.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera. Alden?
Yes, really glad to see the public safety have such a high response. I'm wondering if, as part of these 52 positions, if that includes the training, because this is a big cohort of new security folks coming into the system. One thing is to be a security person at a Walmart, another thing is to be a security person at a school with a very diverse population. So does this include training as well?
So that's actually in a separate line that's already in your base budget. But yes, training is critically important in terms of onboarding and making sure that our security assistants know the expectations and can follow through and take great care when working with our students and community.
Okay.
Are you able to say which line that is in the budget? Sorry.
So it's in your
helpful.
base budget. So
Okay.
this is reflective of the changes in your
Okay.
budget. So it is already in your base budget in terms of an ongoing and annual training that we have for onboarding security assistants. So
And that was increased to be able to,
it doesn't require an increase. It doesn't require a change because it's already a set amount.
already
It's a
established
fixed
there.
cost. So it's not variable to the number of new staff that you bring on.
It
the
was
last-
added to the budget a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and it's temporary part-time funds for them to come back, maybe a day earlier, the ones that are currently existing, and then as they come in. So it's already part of the budget. It's about $250,000.
okay. And the last question I have is if you can just give an example of the functional need for discretionary funds, line 67, for the 2 new positions. Can you just give an example of just one, so people at home have an idea?
Yeah, so we have a pilot that's going on right now at a few of our elementary schools to take a look at reading and mathematics performance in terms of how we're communicating that performance to families. And I'll give you an example. If, as a parent, you receive the Measures of Academic Progress report from the school system, it issues what's called a RIT score, which tracked over time can be used as a measurement of growth in performance. This RIT score does not align to an MCAP score. It does not align to a grade that your child is receiving in their classroom, and it is kind of its own thing. So it is a little confusing for parents to get this report at home and to contextualize this information, this new dialogue, this new set of vocabulary, and I'm going to be completely candid when I say this, in a very confusing small print report that doesn't really tell you a whole lot in plain language as to how your child's performing. A lot of parents really want to know, is my child doing okay or not? I see that they're getting this grade on their report card, but I'm getting this other report, and I can't tell whether or not my child is performing at the appropriate rate of growth. And so we feel like we can do a better job of distilling that information in a meaningful way and communicating that out to parents through a little bit more plain language, and having that plain language translated and making sure that folks can see how their child is performing in a more meaningful way than how we've been doing that in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. And we heard from various groups and parents about this topic, how this will be incredibly helpful, because then it takes parents by surprise.
Yes.
Much of the times where then they're like, I thought my kid was doing well based on what I had, but the graph apparently is very confusing.
Right. And as a parent, you empathize with the experience. It's like, well, if this is the kind of thing that I'm going to get from the school, do I really want to read the other stuff? And we just overall need to do a better job of making sure that folks can see what we're trying to communicate in really clear language. The other position is about collecting social and emotional data and also being able to assess that more accurately. We are providing an awful lot of services in terms of student well-being. We are connecting students to a lot of services. Every student in MCPS has access to mental health supports, but tracking that information, making sure that we can do an accurate data analysis of whether or not these programs are effective, that's a weak spot. That's a challenge for us. There is also an increased burden on the blueprint in terms of making sure that our blueprint expenditures are yielding the kind of return that we hope to see. And so additional support for some of those blueprint reports, this is something that shared accountability could really benefit from.
Okay. All right, Mr. Silvana.
Yes, thank you. I want to emphasize the comments of Mr. Rivera, and when we talk about safety and security, I think those 52 positions are going to have a really big impact on, what we see in our schools, the safety of our schools. And I know a lot of students are looking for things along those lines. When it comes to like the blended online learning program and that sort of distance learning capability, do we have any sort of numbers of what distance learning options we have right now across elementary, middle, and high school, and like what kind of numbers that we're spending there? I know that kind of stretches a little bit into the base budget, but I think it would do a little bit, it would be helpful to be able to see what kind of distance learning options we're already spending our money on, and how that relates to something like this blended online learning program, and how we can do that. And
that's a great question. And actually, that is something that we really would like to explore. I will say that this is one of those chicken and egg budget scenarios, because if this is something that is a part of the board's vision and a part of the future direction of the board, unfortunately, the student course selection cycle is outside of your budget cycle. So this is something that you would want to advertise as part of that course selection process. So knowing that you're going in this direction, you really can approach this a little bit differently. So in a lot of ways, this budget ask is reflective of, do we have permission to go in this direction? Is this a part of your vision and where you see this kind of efficiency going? Because when we bring your course guide for your consideration next year, we would want to communicate quite clearly, this brand new course is not just available at Magruder High School or available at Damascus or available at Blair, but it's available to all students in Montgomery County, or this subset of students, or just the the Down County Consortium, whatever, but be really intentional about what that looks like. So I don't have an answer for you at the secondary level, but just a wealth of possibilities. And at the elementary level, it really is the extension to mathematics. So.
Got it. And then a follow-up for maybe a later date too. Can we get the contract number for how much we spend on like something, for example, like Zoom? Because I know that would be kind of incorporated in the base budget, but something that we should factor in is because that's a cost that we're spending every year, no matter what, right? So how does that factor into how we're utilizing that number?
Thank you, Mr. Savannah. I have a question about line 62. So I'm in full support of the board's resolution in renaming some of our high schools. Magruder High School, as I understand, also is on our CIP. Can staff tell me where they are on CIP when that will happen?
At the moment, my memory is that there are planning funds in the CIP, but the construction was shifted out due to affordability, so it would be on deck sometime in the next 7+ years.
Okay, thank you.
But to answer your question, it is in your queue, and it is and needs to be a part of your next big CIP discussion about how you scope and sequence Magruder. It's important that you're discussing that in the context of this, because a lot of the costs associated with a name change do have to do with the physical structure of the building. And so looking at Magruder in the context of your CIP, it makes sense for you to think about this expenditure in terms of CIP versus operating budget as well. And that's an interesting way for the board to approach this issue as well.
I appreciate that information as we are talking about tight financial situations, that how we can not duplicate spending. This is something we need to look at. I'm going to go for the second round. I think the first round, everybody got a chance. This time I'm going to start with from my right-hand side. Ms. Stewart, please.
Yes. Line number 63. So I'm curious, why exactly do you think we need to save this money out for contracting? Because it seems to me that we could do a pretty thorough job of looking at what programs we have and who has access to the programs and who doesn't. I don't know if could you share what else you'd like to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think we could. This work does take people away from other tasks. That does have a cost associated to it. This could be something that the board chooses to spend elsewhere and commits these funds elsewhere. That definitely can be something. I think it's important to communicate that when we make a decision and that the board goes in a direction, that regardless of that direction, there are cost implications. And so being sure that we are good financial stewards also means budgeting appropriately for the decisions that we know are on the horizon. So do we have a specific budget or things that we think might be attached to this line? Not directly, no. But also being a good steward means that you're planning ahead and that you are not disadvantaging something that you've already invested in to finance something else. And so this is a great placeholder item. It's one of only a couple of placeholder items. The other one being the Magruder naming renaming as a placeholder item, where it really is discretionary by nature, and it really is the board's choice in whether this is the highest and best use of those resources, or whether or not this is something that the team can do on their own. I think it is something that we can do on our own, but but whether or not that's what the board's preference is, or whether or not you'd rather have the insurance or the stability of knowing that if we needed to pull something, we've got a place from which we would do that.
And also, I know we talked about this at the last meeting, that we're going to have a list of all the contracts and how we're looking at each one going forward. So we have that comparison. And because this is a place, I'm just letting you know that we hear from the public all the different contracts and how we're spending money outside of, our the part of the budget includes staff. So thank you.
I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because we are working on that, and we'll have that for you before your next work session for sure. But one of the best and worst parts of this budget is that we are communicating what we actually spend. And some of the items that we talked about last time were not increases, even though they are numerically an increase in the budget. They are just a reflection of what we have actually been spending in the budget. And so in a lot of ways, this is a budget of communicating our truth and sharing publicly where we are and what our financial standing is. And it hasn't been historically great. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yummy, more broccoli.
Ms. Matoya?
Thank you. I have a question about security assistance. And like Mr. Severna and Ms. Rivera-Oven, I want to thank you for including this in the budget. This is something I hear about a lot, especially at the elementary level, especially for a lot of our kids that are going into middle school, from parents, from the kids themselves. So I appreciate that. I'm actually concerned it might not be enough. So I'd like to ask also as a follow-up, someone asked about the training. I think it was Ms. Rivera-Oven. I see in the, and let me make sure I say it correctly, the Safe to Learn Act, that our school security officers are required to take the curriculum training. And my understanding is that that's about 40 hours of instruction. And so I guess I'm wondering how, for 10-month employees, how $250,000 covers them getting 40 hours worth of training before school starts in August. Because obviously we want our security assistants to be ready to go. If not, we're putting them in there, kind of setting everyone up to fail.
Yeah, not all of that happens at the start of the school year or beforehand, and nor should it, because a lot of that learning also has to be contextualized in the experience of them working for a little bit to understand some of the learning so that it's grounded. There is a lot of learning that happens prior to the start of the year, and there is some learning that happens afterwards, but we've got the man himself here to opine and share some more about all of that.
Good morning, Marcus Jones, the Chief of Security and Compliance. 2 points there is the security assistants that are required to go through this training. There is a grant that the state of Maryland provides that funds that training. So we have significant amounts of money not only for our security assistants, but it also assists with the police officers who have to be trained as well. So whether it's recertification or the original certification, annual certification that needs to occur, that is handled via that particular grant. There are different periods throughout the year, throughout the school year, not just in August prior to them in their onboarding, because there are sometimes we do onboard our security assistants mid-year or throughout the year. And so the state has different times that they will have a class. For example, I think there's one coming up in the next couple of months for those security assistants who are new and have not had the opportunity to be certified as of yet. So the certification is not required prior to your start. It's just that you have to have it per state COMAR regulations. It has to be done within 1 year of employment.
Okay, and I guess I just want to make sure that when our security assistants start, both for the benefit of the school and the employee, that they feel like they have what they need. And so if it's that we need to, try to allocate a few more days before school starts to provide that, or, I know schedules get tricky and scheduling all of these things. Because I am just concerned that we're staffing so minimally in that area that, people get sick. Sometimes they get hurt when they're in the schools. And do we have, for lack of a better phrase, substitute security assistants? How do we deal with that? So I know security and safety is always top of mind for the community. I also, notwithstanding, we are not required, we are required to have adequate law enforcement coverage. So my question also is, why are we not viewing this as a non-discretionary item? Notwithstanding that it's an unfunded mandate and all of those things, we can add it to the list. But from what I hear from the community, safety seems to be something that we feel is required.
I think you answered your own question. It's not part of a specific delineated law, contract, policy, or regulation. If the board were to create a regulation on how security assistants were to be staffed, it would move up from discretionary to non-discretionary. But presently you don't, so it stays as a discretionary because it is a choice.
But that's because we're complying with Safe to Learn Act through adequate law enforcement coverage, not through school resource officers.
How you have decided what constitutes adequate is
correct. Is part of an unfunded mandate rather than
right.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Silvestri.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the line item about the early alert. What do you call it? It's not called early alert. The assessment reporting and SEL. I don't know what to call it. Yeah. So I heard your explanation about what these positions will do. I don't see it. Do you have any example of what the product will be that families, I know we've been working on a pilot and we've been working on this for months. So I think it would be very helpful for us to see what will be the end result of what these folks will do. And could you give me an example of a SEL data point that might end up in that piece of paper that parents will interpret easily?
Yeah, absolutely.
And can we say what SEL is for them?
Certainly. So they're two separate things. The first one is assessment reporting and how we do things. We are undergoing a pilot. We can absolutely produce artifacts for the board to take a look at. I'm not entirely certain that that what we're doing right now is what we would expand upon. We may even get a little bit more refined and a little bit cleaner. Those are processes that require some manual work and somebody to generate reports and to curate those reports and produce those reports so that this doesn't fall as a burden on classroom teachers or principals to do this work. But absolutely, we can provide some artifacts for the board to look at. The second one is social emotional learning. Now, in this space, we do have an obligation to make sure that we're not just teaching our the academic child, but rather the whole child, and making sure that our kids grow up to be great human beings and that they are a part of our community in a really meaningful way. This has a lot to do with their well-being, but also making sure that the time that we're spending with our kids, that we are making them into good adults as well, that have great executive functioning, positive reasoning skills, and that they can navigate this world in a meaningful way. We do this in a lot of different ways. We have advisory courses that are throughout the county. We do provide counseling services. As part of the ASCA model, counselors, professional school counselors do go into classrooms and provide classroom lessons on the social and emotional development of our young people. That's a requirement of the ASCA model. But we don't really have a mechanism to collect data on the progress of how that's going. There is no mechanism other than a climate survey to find out how our students are developing as people but we have lots of mechanisms to see how they're developing as academic students. It would serve us well to have a good understanding of the things that we've invested in the past in terms of their social development. And so we're aiming to try to do a better job of that.
So the piece of paper that families would get to give them the full picture of how my child is doing would include a grade on a social emotional characteristic?
I'm not sure we're ready for that. I think that we need to probably have a better understanding of how we're doing in that space before we're ready to assess that. I think that's a great goal for us. I think that is a great thing for us to target in the future. But I think the assessment reporting, that's one thing. And then collecting and assessing our social emotional standing is something else entirely. They're on the same piece of paper because they're going to the same department and they're in the same budget line because they are going to the same place in our shared accountability office, but they are two separate things entirely.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding this. And then there's also blueprints. So this very small amount of money in this very large budget seems to have a lot of different responsibilities. So it's not just about the early alert. It's about more internal work, data crunching, and it's also about blueprints. So I think we need to have a little more clarity for the public in terms of what this will actually do. I don't want to raise hopes that this is just for the early alert.
Sure.
No, it's actually to do a lot more other work, and I think we need some clarity around this. Thank you.
Mrs. Zimmerman?
Thank you. I wanted to talk about line 60 just for a moment. I wanted to make a point here that so many students have been asking us about this, have brought it up in the community. So I think it's really wonderful that we're adding this as a budget line item. I do want to bring up, and I would encourage us to use a little bit more inclusive language when we talk about the funding, just that not everyone who menstruates is female. I also would like to talk about line, I'll go with 64. I have a couple questions, but I want to talk about line 64. I see that we're expanding instructors in some of our preparatory programs. I think that's wonderful. I just want to be clear that then we're not cutting or expanding any of our other career preparatory programming.
I think I might need some more specifics as to what you're talking about.
So if we're expanding here, right, I think that's great. But then in our base budget, the positions that we have there, we're not cutting any, we're not expanding any others. This is our
expansion. We're making reductions to central office for sure. And that's represented in your third work session where we'll talk about central office, because a $7 million reduction is going to impact the number of people that we have on the roster for sure.
Correct, but I'm talking about in career preparatory programming specifically.
Yeah, I don't think we are, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, I have a question. First, I would like to associate myself with a question with the comment from Ms. Stewart and Ms. Silvestri on line item 59, differentiated school site allocation equity add-on. Now, I have observed in the past 2 years, when I read the spreadsheet, at the end of the year, some of our schools have 10% or even 20% of money unspent in their account currently with our current allocation. So can you tell me, if they already have money unspent, why are we adding on money for them?
So I'm going to speak from a principal's perspective, and then I think Ms. Alfonso Windsor will speak from a CFO's perspective. We definitely need to work on teaching our principals how to be good resource allocators, for sure. Ms. Silvestri's suggestion and direction that we need to provide guidance on how to spend this money is really well founded, because we do. And that really needs to be a strength of ours and not something that is kind of left to chance. School administrators in their preparation take one class in school finance. So to become a certified school administrator, it's just one class in resource allocation. There's a whole host of things that our principals and assistant principals really could do to enhance that skill set, to leverage resources to get a better return on investment. That's definitely something that we should do. Oftentimes, we find ourselves in an adverse financial standing in the middle of the year, and we communicate to principals that we are freezing accounts and that we have to do a 10 or 20 or even 30% holdback on their accounts in the middle of the year. Fortunately, I don't think that that's an approach that we should take in the future because it's such a small amount of money relative to the budget. And as a consequence of that, they have gotten into a practice where they are holding money in anticipation of a freeze because it happens with such regularity. And so they really find themselves in this position of having to almost anticipate bad financial outcomes because of tight times and how things that happen outside of their building influence what happens in their building, which is so sad and unfortunate. So I know that our principals work very hard to be the best stewards that they possibly can. They're not trying to overspend because they can't. And so with that, they are trying to be sensitive to some emergency that may happen in February where they get an email from central office that says spending is cut off for the rest of the year. And they are left holding that, and then that restriction is lifted in June, and the school year is over.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Ms. Windsor might add to that.
Yes, sure. And I just wanted to say, that's also a result, unfortunately, of some of our outdated ways of allocating funding and our financial reporting restrictions and categories. So the money that we allocate to the schools, it has to be used only for materials. And I think part of that work in the next couple of months is seeking feedback from principals based on the recommendations of how they're going to use that funding. How can the funding support the needs of their schools? And then we would allocate it based on the financial structures that MSDE requires so that they can spend money in other ways other than materials. Like, Dr. Taylor mentioned the high dosage tutoring that might require TPT funding, which the money that they currently get doesn't allow for that. They might need transportation money for after-school activities, and so on.
Right, or a field trip to provide students a different experience, right? Okay, so that, now, the question about line item 68, central office leadership. Now, I'm all for trainings, enhancement of performance. Can this done, and then we all know that the best training is job embedded training and ongoing training that doesn't feel like is regulatory exercise, but rather improvement of what's needed. Tell me, why is this needed, and can this be done ongoingly?
Definitely needs to be ongoing. This is representative of a 3-year plan, not a 1-year plan. In 2010, Montgomery County Public Schools earned the Broad Prize for Urban Education. In the same year, also won the Malcolm Baldrige Award from the U.S. Department of Labor. They won these 2 awards because of process improvements and high performance tied to a system that they adopted and was universally used throughout the district, both at the building level as well as centrally. Those systems, structures, and processes are no longer in place. Now, I'm not saying that we need to be a Malcolm Baldrige school system or that we need to follow structures that have been in place in the past. I'm not saying that at all. But the absence of a structure has not served MCPS well. Quite candidly, we're not good at this. We don't manage projects as well as we should, and partly because even though there are folks that have project management expertise, they are not using the same language, system, and approach as their colleagues. And so some things get lost in translation, our bureaucratic layers get in the way, and so finding a mechanism in which to navigate those layers and to create workflow systems makes a lot of sense. This is not something that we can do ourselves. This is something that we will need help to do. And again, this is one of those items that it requires an investment that we would have to build on over multiple years to create capacity. It would be a practical impossibility to take all of the leaders in the district and to do it all at one time. So we would advise for some sort of iterative approach and for some mechanism where there is some third-party validator that can certify our approach, whatever that approach is. And there are many different approaches. There's Lean Six Sigma, there's PMP, there's Scrum. Whatever your approach is to project management, adopting a singular approach, not 10 different approaches, would serve the district well in its management and hopefully deliver project management and outcomes that meet the board and the community's expectations.
Thank you. Ms. Rivera-Alvin?
Just very quickly, with the discretionary expenditure, this is music to my ears because for years we haven't done equity differentiation with the needs of schools when it comes into farms and EML and SE, with kids with disabilities and medical fragile and so on and so on. So, and I know we encounter that when we had the freeze, and then I was getting calls from teachers saying, we have no more money to make paper copies in the 3 languages that we serve our children, or we need to make a copy of an instruction book for other teachers that are coming on because we don't have the materials. So one glove does not fit all so you have to see the whole need across the district. The only thing I'm going to say with line 60 about the menstrual hygiene products is I hope we're also looking with the same kind of equity that we're looking at as well with an equity lens, because by law we have to have the products in every school. In high school, I think it has to be every classroom. In middle school, every bathroom. And then in middle school, it has to be every other. And then I believe in elementary school is the nurse's office, so whoever has the products. So we have 211 schools. I think this is really nice. But again, I want us to look at it with an equity lens for those schools that have the largest populations of farm kids and so on, who this is not a luxury item, but this is needed. And as somebody who works in this field and who has provided to some of the schools in my area with these products during COVID and after COVID and today, this is very much needed. So I'm hoping, I know we didn't talk about it, but the 2 grant writers that are going to be coming on, that these are some areas that they can actually focus on, because there is some funding that the district can actually go after to not just this, but even the professional development in some other areas. So I'm looking forward to connecting the dots on all of those. Thank you.
Dr. Taylor, I know you have a few more slides to go over. I want to leave plenty of time at the end for board members to ask questions. And I also want to give board members an opportunity. I know that today we are focusing on discretionary funds, but I know that during the last week or so, you might have come up more questions about the non-discretionary funds, and that will be an opportunity to bring up some of those questions and so that the staff can address it. Go ahead, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. And for this last segment of the presentation portion of our work session today, Ms. McGuire is going to go through some of the follow-up questions that the board had asked and provide some of those details for the board.
Thank you. And so we did want to bring back some of the information again that you all had asked in your first work session in particular. And you will see at the end, we also do have a catalog of the pieces that we are still working on. But the ones that we could bring back, we wanted to do that today. So I'll just run through them. They're presented in no particular order. The first question that we have here is there was a question regarding the projected level breakdown of Chromebook repairs by school level. And you can see that breakdown here. Certainly the largest amount that we're projecting is at the middle schools, followed by elementary schools and high schools. I do want to emphasize again that this is not an increase. This really is to bring our budget levels in line with our experience in this area and with our actual expenditures in this area. The second question we have here relates to the current and projected pre-K enrollment. Certainly we had talked in the first work session regarding our plans for our proposed expansion of pre-K. It's important to look at this both in terms of special education and general education, so we've broken that out here. We did include Head Start in that total of our current enrollment. Just as a reminder, we are working with our DHHS colleagues on the Head Start grant because that is a collaborative experience with them. But if the budget if the budget request was fully approved, we would be able to increase our general education and Head Start enrollment as you see there. And certainly we're projecting an increase for special education again under the budget that's requested. Okay. We can go to the next one. We did have a question regarding the translation of curriculum materials. Particularly this question was related to CKLA. We do have our curriculum resources includes the availability in Spanish, as well as some of the student materials. We do not currently have other languages available in the CKLA curriculum. However, we do translate the parent letters. So those materials we translate ourselves. And all of the translation that you see here is included in the budget. I want to spend just a minute on the cost, the comparison of compensation. There was a question regarding the total increase in compensation that was budgeted last year in the 25 budget versus what we're putting into the our placeholder that we are representing in the 26 budget. And as you can see, and as you had pointed out, I believe, Ms. Silvestre, certainly the 26 number is larger. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, frankly, as the salary base grows every year, a % increase on that base is going to be larger every year. So even if the % overall was the same, even if it was, say, 3% in both years, the second 3% is going to be larger because we have a larger salary base, a larger number of positions. And so that is going to be a natural increase over time, even if the % were to stay the same. There was, however, as we discussed, a different approach to last year, and that also makes a difficult apples to apples comparison between the two years. But there's the numbers that we brought back. Go ahead.
Also, I just want to bring to your attention last year, for this year, our negotiated agreements were a 2.5% increase. Right now, our placeholder reflects a 3.25% increase.
Right. Go to the next one. We did also, some information was requested regarding details on the dual enrollment costs as well as the AP/IB costs. The question of whether there is local or state funding, this is a mandate which does not carry with it specific state funding. And so again, as we discussed, some of the funds that come from the state are for specific purposes, such as the community schools. That, of course, carries a local match. This is an area where the local funds would need to support it, but we also do, of course, have state funds as part of our overall revenue picture. During the fall 2004 semester, we have identified that 73% of dual enrollment students were not FARMS eligible. And then there was also a question regarding the % of AP exams and IB exams that were unused or canceled, and the numbers and the % are reflected for you there. This question related to, we've discussed the transfer of positions in special education paraeducator positions that we are currently primarily providing those services through temporary part-time. That's what that TPT stands for. Apologies for the letters. Temporary part-time, which is essentially paying for hours of service without an identified position. The budget request is to transfer that into positions. And so the FY25 base for that right now is 2.6 million. And the identified amount of the paraeducator position transfer would be 21 million. There was also a question regarding Medicaid reimbursement, and we do have correspondence from MSDE and indicating from last spring, indicating that in fact we are not able to seek that for school-based positions. And that really is the information that we were able to bring back to you in this moment. We will, of course, continue. Go ahead. We will continue to work through these. We've cataloged the remaining follow-ups from the January 14th work session that we were not able to complete in time for this one. And then if you can go to the next slide, we also have identified the follow-ups that came from the public hearing that you held last week as well. Of course, we know that there are follow-ups from today, and there will continue to be. So again, we will continue to work through those and bring back information to you as we are able.
Thank you so much for making such detailed notes, accurate notes to reflect the board's requests. I'm now going to, if you don't have anything to add, I will open for question. Do you have anything to add?
No, we're just delighted to follow up on these items, and our running list continues to grow. So we're working as fast as we can to get you as quick the information that you need to make this budget decision.
We certainly appreciate that. This time for question, I'm going to start from my left-hand side. Let me see the lights. Ms. Silvestri.
Ms. Alfonso-Windsor, you said this very quickly, so I just wanted to make sure I captured it correctly. Last year, the salary increase, not the cost of living, but can you help me understand that?
Sure. For
There's
the
two different things, right?
Sure. So for FY26, our current year that we negotiated, the salary increases, the funding that we put in the budget. It was the 79 million reflect a 2.5% COLA or inflation cost, and a step increase for those employees that qualified. So that was the cost that was negotiated for this year that was placed in the budget for FY25. For FY26, for next year, the placeholder, and again, we haven't finalized all the negotiations yet, the placeholders indicates a 3.25% general wage increase or COLA and on a step for those employees that qualify.
Okay. So the COLA is the one it's a cost of living
Correct.
increase. And how do we determine, that's also negotiated?
That is
2.5,
negotiated, yes, that is
2.83.
negotiated,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Ms. Rivera-Alvin.
I also had that question, but so that makes sense of why the big increase compared to last year.
It is the single largest increase in our budget proposal. That increase and the associations are in lockstep with our tentative placeholder right now in terms of what we've put, because we don't have a finalized agreement at this time, but that is in lockstep also with what county has for its negotiated wage increase.
Oh, that's my other question. Okay, so you answered that. And the only thing I'm going to ask with the remaining follow-ups is under the list of schools without a second administrator, can you also put what programs those schools have? Because some schools have more special, specific programs than others. And also, if you can also put the farm rate for those, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Matoya.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, first, I appreciate the equity add-on. I think it's probably long overdue, as I'm sure you do as well. But I do, and on that note, I just want the community to understand that for a lot of our schools, within the first month, sometimes they are out of the money that they get allocated for supplies for their students. I know principals, teachers, staff who pull out of their own pockets to provide things for their students. Parents who help to provide things so that other students can have things. We're buying copier paper, right? So the hold that Dr. Taylor talks about is absolutely, what's going on in these schools. So again, I applaud the equity add-on and even the need for guidance because, again, they're not necessarily getting the training they want to do it in the best way. So I think it's great to provide that. I do have a question, though, about something you mentioned as an example of what it could be used for. You said translated text can be purchased by principals. And then we just heard about CKLA, the new English curriculum only coming with translated materials for Spanish. So my question is we want our schools to use this equity add-on to translate those materials for parents or students. I just want to clarify so I can understand.
And I'll give you a couple of examples. Some schools have used additional books as like an incentive for performance. One of the most innovative things that I've seen that's been great is when students exhibit behaviors that we are really excited about and really positive about, they may have a book vending machine.
Got it. Okay.
And so purchasing books to fill that book vending machine, they could purchase them in English, they could purchase translated books, they could purchase other supplemental materials. But the idea here is to supplement, not supplant.
Okay, and that's what I just wanted to make sure, that we're not expecting our schools to, because the curriculum only comes in these two languages, if you have students that speak Amharic, go figure it out, and here's $100 to do it, right? Okay, great, thank you. And then my other question has to do with CREA, which we don't talk about much, and I appreciate that being part of the budget as well. My question is, when we're looking at the line item and for the expansion, so we're looking at $1.6 million. That's above what they're already receiving. And what are they already receiving, ballpark?
So the CREA program, as I'm sure you all know, has been mismatch of different areas that I've just provided supports. The only item in that line that is currently associated with CREA is those paraeducator positions. So CREA currently have 4.875, educator positions. Everything else in that budget is completely new for next year. Is their own, budget line items. So make sure that those resources stay there instead of having to borrow resources from other areas for that program.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And that's actually exactly why I asked, because I know that this is a program that has been perpetually underfunded. It has great potential. It serves a lot of students. We have such dedicated staff there. And the one thing I want to ask within those line items is, where does food fall? Because I know that has been a problem. These are our MCPS students, like all of our other MCPS students, but there have been times where, in my opinion, they have not been treated as such when it comes to even things as basic as getting meals, right? Most of our CREA students are working all day, sometimes manual labor jobs, and then from what I'm hearing, sometimes they're getting things that look like Crustables, right? Those little peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
No, that's a great question, and that's something that we're going to have to look into, to explore, but we'll follow up with that, absolutely, because that is a great, something to definitely we need to look at.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Stewart?
So back to the equity fund. There's something called the Independent Activity Fund. How is that related to this?
So the Independent Activity Fund is the school's really checking account, right? That's what they have their money in the bank. That's funding that they collect from students for field trips. The PTAs, as you know, are able to donate or do fundraisers to provide that funding for the schools. Part of the Independent Activity Funds is what we call our ICV funding, right? When the schools hold activities, they get reimbursement from ICV, although that funding is very restricted by the county and how that funding can be used, and it's something that we've tried to change for several years, but they still hold tight to that MOU on how that funding can be used. So it's really just, the ability of the schools to raise money for their school, and that funding, a lot of it is not restricted. It's based on, what they can do. But as we have mentioned, and I know as fiscal management, we have discussed this many times, it is up to the school and the ability, depending on their populations, of raise money. So that is where the equity add-on can really bring a lot of support, or we're hoping that is kind of leveling that field, because, if you have a school that have a foundation, their own foundation that can donate money and augment that, independent activity funds, that's where we see the disparities in our schools.
So a couple of things about the two differences. One source of revenue comes to the school to support ongoing operations and materials and supplies. That's the funds that we're talking about as part of this discretionary allocation. A good moniker for that might be central office funds that each school receives. And then the independent student school activity funds they don't expire like the central office funds do. So each year, the central office funds are allocated to each school on a July 1 to June 30th schedule. Anything that's unspent goes back to the county as a consequence of that, like our budget does. But in their activity fund, it's not that way. It really is very much their ongoing support. It does not have the same budget calendar. Those funds do not expire. They continue in perpetuity, and they are also audited so that they are following good financial practice, and that is a part of the board's audit process of their accounts as well. So they are school funds, but they are different, and they are used for different purposes, and they have different rules associated with them.
And another question I have, several times in this budget, you said this is actually just reflecting what we spent. It's not necessarily an add-on. But it's really hard to no, you didn't just magically come up with $4 million. That was allocated somewhere in the last budget. Yeah, it's a little difficult to make that analysis if it's not actually extra, but it's coming up as extra. And I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around where was it in the budget? It had to be somewhere.
Well, luckily the last 3 years we've had ESSER funds. And ESSER funds had plugged a lot of those, holes in our budget because of the reductions that had to be made or where decided choice, those are choices that were made, to make sure that we were able to support the compensations and all of that. So we reduced other areas and supported it through ESSER. So like the Chromebook repairs, for example, just to take an example, we used to have $1.5 million in the budget for Chromebook repairs 3 years ago before we increased the amount of Chromebooks to 160,000 Chromebooks in the system. And then we got the ESSER grant, which then provided the additional $3 million for those Chromebook repairs. And if you remember, a couple of years ago, we also had to make the decision of shift a lot of expenses from the base budget. It was a total of about $40 million that were shifted to ESSER. And last year, we were able to bring some of it back, but not all of it back. We were fortunate in the last 3 or 4 years that we had those ESSER funds and a lot of the federal funds that were able to supplement or take care of those holes in our budget, for all those expenses. But we've had to make reductions, and those funds never went back.
That helps a lot with the explanation, because that was actually the line item I was thinking about. $4 million had to come from somewhere. It doesn't just magically appear.
So when people talk about the fiscal cliff, this is partly what they're talking about. And the other space that you are also eating into is salary lapse. So your salary lapse and turnover has also been impacted by this. And with so many sub accounts, you are really taking pennies to cobble into dollars to cover losses, and that's not sustainable. And so we have to position ourselves in a more sustainable path moving forward.
And just one more thing, something we heard about last night at our budget meeting was activity buses for elementary schools. And yes, our Title I schools, a lot of times it goes towards that and maybe other grant type funds, but it's, year by year, whether a PTA can raise those monies. And so that is something I would like to look into the budget. At one point, with these these funds, I assume that could, I think you mentioned activity buses. But then there are some things you mentioned that maybe a PTA can't pay for. So yeah, it's a little hard to unpack all of that. But especially those activity buses are, it could be an issue where we don't really have a good policy across the board.
Thank
Something
you.
to look at.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Ms. Silvestri.
Thank you. Sometimes in the discussion, things are said that I don't understand, so please excuse me if it sounds like I'm belaboring a point. But let me start with Chromebooks. Dr. Taylor, I think in the last budget work session, in the context of the Chromebook discussion, you said we no longer have a Chromebook for every student. Is that because they are being repaired, or who doesn't have a Chromebook?
I think it varies, but our overall inventory is not reflective of enough Chromebooks for one student to have one Chromebook for every student, because again, your budget does not reflect enough funds to repair or replace every Chromebook when they break. And some get to the point where they break beyond repair, and there isn't a funding mechanism in your budget for fiscal 25, because again, ESSER funds expired going into this fiscal year, that you don't have that mechanism to replace it at this time.
So there are classrooms today where teachers are not doing something technology or Chromebook based because they don't have enough Chromebooks.
Absolutely. That is a very real issue. And so if anything, we've taken a step back in terms of technology integration because we haven't budgeted adequately for Chromebook repair and replacement.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Back to the salary increase from last year to this year. So now that I understand the COLA and the STEP, for a future follow-up, I'd like to know the cost of a STEP for this year.
And I can tell you that right now.
Okay, great.
The average cost of a STEP, it doesn't change a lot year to year. It's usually between $40 and $45 million.
40 to 45 million. Okay, so within this year's, how much is it? 119, you said? 45 or so is the STEP, and the rest is the cost of living. Okay,
Correct.
thank you. We've heard in the discussion about translated curriculum, and I'm really confused about that because I understand we have two-way immersion programs in the county where we do need curriculum in Spanish and French and Mandarin, but I can't think of an instance where we would need translated curriculum into Amharic. So can you explain?
Sure, and I think I might be the root of that confusion, so I'm going to apologize for that. We may want to supplement materials either for at home or just for a student to have, where we may be incentivizing an activity where it may make sense to provide supplemental materials in another language. That might be a good idea. Or we may be wanting to translate some school document beyond what we are currently providing and able to send that home so that parents have a better understanding of what's going on. Right now, our translated services is pretty overwhelmed and pretty taxed as it is right now, and the demands exceed our capabilities. So anything that we do in that space is always, again, to supplement, not to supplant what we're currently doing.
Okay, just wanted to clarify, the curriculum is in English, Spanish.
Correct.
And I hope French and Mandarin, although we haven't talked about that for our immersion programs. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mrs. Zimmerman?
I actually have follow-up questions to what you just asked. So when we're talking about Chromebook repairs, is that including things like our Chromebook carts, our Chromebook chargers? That's all included in that, or is that separate funding?
I have to get back to you with specifics, but I think that is in that. Yeah.
Okay, and then we're talking about the one-to-one with students. There's also a program where elementary students are able to get a Chromebook from school and take it home. Is that included in our one-to-one? Or like, where are those Chromebooks coming from?
I think that model has changed throughout the years. Originally, when we did, when the pandemic, every student was taking a Chromebook home, but I think that model has changed, and it's changed depending on the schools as well. So we can look into that.
Okay.
And come back to you.
Because I know that there are still some schools that students are able to take a Chromebook home. Parents have to sign up for it, et cetera.
I just wanted to note too that this is really a portion of the technology costs. And again, that Chromebook repair, which is the day in, day out, I cracked this thing, I need it repaired. That's a really important part that we're investing in here. And again, reflecting the actual costs. There are other technology costs that are supported in the TechMod project, which is within your capital budget. And so this is also, so some of the hardware that you're talking about may also be reflected there. So we do have other technology pieces as well. This really is focused on this particular piece.
Awesome. I think we can all appreciate that if there's not the charger, that then you just have a really fancy paperweight, and that's super annoying. Similarly, to follow up about the translation question, so it sounds like, as we were talking about CKLA not having really any other language resources, it sounds like as a county, we're choosing to move away from programming like translanguaging, which would be, for example, a student has recently arrived, their main language spoken, for example, let's say is Spanish, that they're speaking Spanish, and we're using Spanish text to help relate to English, or they've read a text in English and we ask them the questions in Spanish to help bridge between the two languages. So it sounds like that's something, like with this funding, we're saying that we're starting to move away from that approach, or is that inaccurate?
So again, this is about supplementing what we already have as the base curriculum with more. And in general, I think one of the challenges is that our EML population isn't monolithic. It's very diverse, and there are over 100 languages that we're supporting, not just one or two. But if Ms. Pugh wants to add to that.
Sure, just adding, no, we still have the TWI programs and the one-way immersions where we're using materials to do translanguaging and thinking about the cognitive load of both languages very intentionally. So that it's not impacting those programs.
Okay, so it wanted to bring up that if that's, the program that we're choosing to go with, and that we're saying that the materials that we have are kind of the materials that we're keeping, just that it seems like that might be a shift, and something to think about with the load that our educators and principals, et cetera, are going to have to take on with those materials to help with that.
Thank you, Mr. Savannah.
Yeah, so I want to, again, kind of go back to that Chromebook piece for a minute. I know we have a policy that says, if a Chromebook is lost or broken, it can be from $25 to $150 that the parents are paying. So I guess my question is this number that we're talking about a reflection of no longer charging families for that money, or is it just a reflection of this money does not fully cover replacement of a Chromebook?
A couple of things. You also have in your budget, and if you take a look at line 4, we also collect revenues to offset some of our expenses. And sometimes we're not able to collect revenues even when there is a damage to a Chromebook. And so that's a loss. And so we still have to account for it one way or another. So this is not a reflection of a change in policy. It's a good question, though.
Okay, got it. And then kind of just following up on that. So do we have the numbers on what the revenue is for this specific versus what, because we have the expenditures, so follow up.
Ms. Rivera-Alvin?
Yeah, two things. Just following up on the correct question or statement, I just want to say thank you for recognizing the need and the value of the students at CREA. It was due. And with that being said, the food situation has not been ideal. I'm just going to be honest, as someone who's spent quite a few times there in the evening doing some tutoring. So I know that the kids at the Edison program during the day, they're able to get hot breakfast and they're able to get a hot lunch. And the food for the kids at CREA is usually just a bag of whatever they get. I want to say thank you to folks like Nourish Now who continue to donate to CREA and so on. So my hope is, and I know we have, I think about 10 or 12 students during the Edison program during the day, but we have over 100 kids in the evening. My hope would be that we're able to do the nourishment that we do for the other students as well as, for the CREA students, because as we know, these are probably some of the most at-risk, needed kids who need support. And I know it's not a school, because if it was a school, this would be a perfect school for a community school. And it would truly make a difference in their daily lives and their academic achievement. I think you could actually measure that. So with that being said, I just hope that we look into that. With the bilingual materials, this just reminded me, we were talking, so this is not so much, this is for supplemental stuff. So I'll give an example. So they were reading in one of the schools that I go to quite a bit in the kindergarten, the Little Red Hand, and they had a lot of kids, EML kids who spoke Spanish. But this school doesn't have a PTA, so they don't have any extra funding to be able to buy the supplies. So so we donated a couple of the Little Red Hands to the school. So that's the kind of thing. So the kids and the parents could also be part of it and so on. So there's just, and that's why I think the equity component to that, as well as this, to me, it all connects, right? As with the supplies that we spoke, the feminine hygiene supplies, and all that equity lens has to be put into all these decisions that we're making. Including with food, including with materials, including with all that. So, thank you for me, this is very comprehensive, and I think sometimes we don't connect the dots on how one thing affects the other. So for me, it's really those inequities that we see that are not very noticeable to the naked eye, but when you are at schools or you have kids like Ms. Montoya, or you have been teaching like Mrs. Zimmerman, or we have, kids like the three of us and Mrs. Stewart that we have seen through the years in MCPS. So thank you.
Dr. Taylor, for the viewing public, I want to draw our attention to table number 1. There have been some questions raised under other salaries. Table number 1, other salary, there is other non-position salaries, and we see a huge increase there from FY25 to FY26. It's $107 million. Can you tell us what's comprised in this line item?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. Because of the financial structures, position salaries cannot be budgeted unless we have a specific job code associated with it. So that is where the placeholder for our salary increases is reflected. A portion of it, there's the benefits associated with that is reflected under category 12 in the table. It has to be broken down differently. Enterprise funds and grant funds, the salary increases associated with those that we have to add are on other areas as well, but that big increase is a reflection of that placeholder for our salary increases. Once we ratify contracts, we move forward, then all that is spread and you will no longer see it there. It's going to go up into the position salary side of the table.
So let me clarify that, because that's a lot. Let's unpack it a little bit. Including in this $107 million is the benefits we're talking, the benefit increase we're talking, the whole we are feeling?
So the $107 million there is specifically for the salary placeholder, for the compensation piece. But part of the compensation piece, that's why you see that the total amount is $120 million. There's a benefit portion of that is going to be reflected in the table 1 underneath where it says, under, let me pull it up really quickly so that I can talk to it.
And while Ms. Alfonso Windsor is looking that up, this is a great topic of conversation and actually a really rich thing to discuss, because this is one of those things that will change in the budget over time as our contracts get ratified. This is hopefully the accountants in our community are celebrating this conversation, because this is very much a reflection of how public accounting works and how we have to account for things in specific categories until they become actualized. And when they're actualized, we can account for them differently. So it's a great conversation to have.
Actually, that explains it. So what we are looking at, this is the negotiation items with our unions at the moment, and this is a placeholder for it. And the FY25 number reflected after the negotiation what's remaining in this line. And right now is everything, placeholder for everything for now.
Correct.
For the compensation.
Correct.
Okay.
So that we have $107 million added as a placeholder. And then if you people look down on table one under other costs, you're going to see an increase of $67 million for benefits. That's the increase related to the placeholder plus the $40 million that we're adding, for health benefits. And then as we're adding new positions, obviously, we always have to budget for benefits for them as well. So that's where that is reflected.
Thank you for that information, and hope people are paying attention. Now, I also want to draw our attention to attachment B for the fiscal year 26 projected special education enrollment services and positions. This is a question that came up last night at our community information session at Seneca Valley High School. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the staff, many of whom are sitting here, that joined us last night, and the community member who joined us. So on that table, there's a line. We see the FY25 to FY26. We see that in a lot of our categories, there's a student increase in the projection for FY26, which is aligned with our understanding. Our students in special education has increased, the number has increased. However, there is one line that says twice exceptional formerly GT and LD students. That line, the projection is a decrease, a 30% decrease, a large decrease. And one of the comment made is, are we starving that program? So I want you to be able to explain where this projection comes from and why do we seeing a decrease in one special education category?
So thank you for that question. And I might have to do a little follow-up on that. When offices are determined what their budget is for next year, they actually have to look at what they're projecting their enrollment to be. So if they're seeing a reduction in enrollment, they have to budget appropriately based on the trends, unless we determine that we want to expand that program or make changes to the program. So what you're seeing, and I was at the budget function last night, and I did hear her concerns that because we are not doing as much for the program as in the past, the enrollment has decreased. But the departments have to do their budget based on what they're seeing in terms of enrollment, and that's what they're seeing right now, a decrease. We can follow up to determine how they see that decrease. Is it something that the system is doing, as it was mentioned yesterday, or it's just a normal attrition for that program?
I appreciate that very much. I'm going to look around to see are there any other questions.
Just a follow-up to what you said.
Sure, Ms. Matoya.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to the 2E program, I would like that clarification as well, because I will say that in the community, I have heard enough times to raise it here that nobody knows what that program is. No one understands whether their child can be part of it, whether it even really exists. I've had parents say they've called to inquire for their child because it seems like it might be a good fit, and they're basically told it doesn't exist anymore. So I, too, am concerned that it may be that we as a school system are, playing a part in this decrease. And I will say also that I know at the elementary school level, the lack of, for lack of a better phrase, advanced coursework for our youngest learners is a continuous frustration for families and parents who are told, sorry, we just don't have anything. And then those children are sitting there, they're bored, they're frustrated, maybe there's more behavior issues. So again, when we talk about creating additional opportunities for our students who may have already finished all of their high school or their K through 12 coursework, or they want to take classes at another school. I really want us to remember that we have students in their own schools who are not learning what they need to learn without any extras. Thanks.
I think this might be a topic our special population committee can take on and do a deep dive into. All right, Ms. Stewart.
Actually, this kind of follows up on the question I had about decreased enrollment in our special programs as well. I see a trend of some of our programs having attrition, but maybe not because there's not need. So it's something that we should probably look at as a system.
All right, seeing no lights, I really appreciate the system information and appreciate the thoughtful questions from my colleagues. I look forward to our third conversation, work session on the budget. And as a reminder to everyone, we have two more community information sessions, one at Paint Branch and one virtual. You can still sign up for them and or show up to join us. We have one more work session and one more public hearing. So thank you so much for this conversation, and I will see you all soon.